I can hear you. You cannot hear me. And then it died straight away. Hello, everyone! Everyone on my stream, you can hear me, but... Oh god, oh god, everything's going wrong right now. Oh god, everything is going wrong. Just... Bah! It's terrible! So for my side of things, hello everyone and welcome. This is Brian Rose Smith, live in the Forbidden Library. I'm not sure we're gonna be able to do the collab. Because I'm apparently dying. The audio signal is taters. This is the worst version of events! Can you guys even hear the thingy? Oh no. Apparently, like, you're not even coming through on my stream either. Nope, that's your stream I just had going through
that. She just restarted it.
I actually don't think I'm hearing you through the call at all. I'm hearing you through your own stream because like I said, I have your stream up, but I didn't realize you can message as me. This is literally awful. I heard him for a second, but his audio was crispy. Yeah, because like I said, I think I put his stream through. Oh lordy. The worst stream. We'd actually communicate better if we watched each other's streams rather than actually be in Discord together. Maybe it's just Discord, because obviously my stream is okay. Yeah. Yeah, I might restart my Discord. Restart Discord. Yeah. Okay, close that. Let's open up Taskmaster and make sure Discord is as closed as physically possible. Discord, end task. Discord's fried. Fried potato. Discord. End task. It did work fine 10 minutes ago. And then it just died. Sorry, I can still hear him because I have a stream up. I recommend if you just click his stream. And then you could just watch both of us and we could just communicate through that. Good idea. Good idea. Okay, I think that's okay. Let's try open Discord up now. La 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 la, collab issues. Okay. Calling teller. Don't tell him that I'm calling him. He can message as me, that's just rude. It's because I've let him use my little, my chat thing, so he can see all the chats at once. Which is why he can message me. He's not in my account, but he can see my stuff. Tella is a potato now. Let's call. Bwap bwap. Hello. Hello.
Oh, there we go. Now I'm connected. Hello?
Hello.
Is it working? Chat isn't working.
I can hear you. I can hear you. Can you guys hit Tella too? It looks like it's working on OBS. Got it loud and clear. Heck yes! It wasn't my internet. It was Discord's fault. Yeah, it was saved, maybe. Tella? I don't think it's saved. I can't hear him again. Shit. It looks like we can see him still speaking. Look at his mouth move, but we can't hear it. It worked for 2 seconds. Worked for a whole 3 seconds.
You're trying to talk.
Can see you. Mouth move, but no words. No. I'm coming through on his a little bit, and he's coming through a little here, but just not enough.
Not enough.
Not enough.
You hear me now?
I can't hear you, and you seem to be coming through.
Okay, you're sounding a little better as well.
Yeah. Shall we try continue?
Okay. Let's try.
Okay. The Bryans must go on. Oh, it's going a little bit again.
No, it's not working. It's not working.
Oh, so silly.
Oh no.
Oh, no. It works for like a minute, and then it goes again, and then it comes back again, and then it goes again, and then it comes back again, and then it goes again.
What I heard you saying was again.
Again. The repeating cycle of good and then bad.
I think it's an internet issue. I think we'll have to say.
I have no idea what you just said. Please repeat. Over. Tella turning into a techno dance remix. I could see my potato on his screen glitching out and being all not moving enough too. Should we should we try or should we call it and then try again next week or something? He probably can't hear me. Do you want to try a game or do you want to try again next week? And pray to the pray to look at Discord. Oh my dum. Might need to try rebooting your computer. We might have to try another day. Lamau. VTube Studio. Less data in the collab screen. My bad. This is supposed to be the work of Nulak. She might be behind this. Who knows? Operating jamming equipment. God damn it. I don't want to restart my whole computer. That's such a pain in the butt. I have to set everything up again. Boo!
Is it working better?
I did hear you.
I'm hearing you as well.
Hearing?
Maybe VTube was just taking up too much?
Like I say, maybe if we...
I'm still hearing. Chat, can you hear me?
It sounded like you said cat. It's funny. No, if you're going again. Yeah, like I said, maybe if we end the VTube Studio collab. I'll leave the collab bit.
I'm hearing you.
How are we doing now?
About this.
Kind of okay-ish.
A little better.
Little bit.
Never mind.
No, we're getting moments. Clear for a bit, then cut off. Yeah. Big boom. Yeah. I think this collab may have to wait for another day. Which is sad. I was listening to fan-made videos of Tom Clancy's Red Storm Rising, so I'm very much in that mindset. Yeah, much sad.
I don't know.
We'll just have to try our best next week. Pray to the internet gods for next week.
Yes, we must pray.
What if Teller switches to Morse code? But I can't read Morse code. Well, Tel's gonna go now. We're gonna have to go read Pride and Prejudice like I originally planned. I have a confession. I did pretty much entirely forget that I had a collab today, which is why the stream was originally scheduled as Pride and Prejudice until Teller messaged me like an hour before and was like, hey, we got that thing today. And I was like, oh shit! So yeah. I can also close his chat so I don't get his chat. Boo, disabled. I'm gonna have to take a minute to potentially... So you might have to give me... Explains it. I thought I misread the schedule. Like, no, you didn't. I forgot. When we were scheduling it together, he was like, okay, next Sunday. And for some reason, he said that last week. But for some reason, I had it in my head. It was next Sunday. So, like, what's next Sunday? The 27th. That's when I was, for some reason, had it in my head. But it's fine. Now it is going to be next week. I was technically correct. So, until then, give me a hot second and I will set up Pride and Prejudice. I will try to change some of the names and the Twitter things. And here we go. BRB. Okay, we're back. We're ready. There was something else we needed to do. Now Tella's not around. I can update my 100-book spreadsheet. Yay! Because I've read a few things this week, mostly webtoons again. But we did do a Patreon stream this week that had some SCPs in. So 160 was SCP 1689. So SCP. Is that what I classed it as for my SCPs? I have big sections of SCPs in here. It should just be. Oh no, I classed SCPs as short stories. Short story, SCP, and yes, definitely series. That one was specifically, hey, you're always reading chat. Doesn't that count for the spreadsheet? I have had a few people mention that maybe. Oh, I forgot to change all the streaming stuff. Oh, it's such a good name for the stream, but I have to delete it. Readings, Pride and Prejudice, cause internet said no collab. Sad face. Writing and reading. And then to quickly change the YouTube one as well, now I think about it. But I've had multiple people mention that maybe it should count. Reading cause internet said no collab. Copy. Paste. Reading to you. And I'm just gonna save that. Quickly change the thumbnail. I forgot to do all that when I went on my BRB. The most organized stream from me that you've ever seen. But is that too surprising? Really? Oh, at least I already had the thumbnail sorted for this, since I, forgot. Okay, so YouTube details should be updated as well if you guys want to refresh at any point. Nice. If we do that, Phantom, should each chatter be counted separately? Like, if you chat enough, then maybe. Because, like, just one chat shouldn't really be enough. Because I don't count, like, one webtoon chapter as enough. And you guys... But if anyone chats enough to count as 20 chapters of webtoon, maybe. Anyway, I was going to tell you that SCP-1689 was, unsurprisingly, a unlimited bag of potatoes. Which is why that was suggested to me during the stream. 616. No, 161, not... 616 is Stitch. SCP- which one's this one? 1555. This was a cannon who fires mice and was connected to a really weird and homicidal building. New viewer who dis. I could try writing a short story. There was once a man. He was kind of okay. The end. How's that? It's a story. It's technically a bit of flash fiction. Series. 162. SCP 6820, which I did record the end of for patrons, but I forgot to. It's uploaded. I just haven't given it to them yet. I'll do that tomorrow. Okay, and what are the ones that I do? Like I said, I'm reading my my webtoons even more recently. So I've been reading. How many episodes have I read? Only enough to put it once. Okay, I've been reading for 683, leveling up my husband to the max. I kind of hate this title because it makes it sound really RPG, but it's not an RPG series. It's just she's regressed, and her husband was pretty cold in her other life, and eventually it all led to her death, and then she goes back to her wedding day, and she's like, I'm gonna change it all. And then her husband's weirdly loving, and she's confused. This is a webtoon. It's by Non and Callion. This is a series. Can I drop a long explanation on refining and distributing of gasoline and diesel in the US? Not gonna do it, but it would be like a whole novel. Yeah, please don't. I'd rather read something more fun. Preparing for the future. My future husband does not need leveling. He's perfect the way he is. Also, I think I've read enough Charming Duke of the North to have a second. Oh, nearly. I'm 2 chapters off being able to add more Charming Duke of the North. What about this one? No, I've only done 8 episodes of that one. Yep, that's all I can add for this week. Oh, do you know what other fun thing we can do? I have to get my hand cam sorted for it. But this is the messiest stream I've ever done. Hot damn. Maiden went onto my throne, which I should advertise more. I have a throne, by the way, which is a website where you can I can list things, and if you want to be cool and buy me things, then you can buy them through there, and it gets delivered to me. I put a random assortment of 50 Pokemon cards on there, and Maiden bought them, so we could also potentially hang cam that a little bit and open some Pokemon cards, because that'll also be fun. 6, how much is that now? 10, 23,000, take 163, that leaves me at 9,837. 9,837. We're going through it a lot faster. I'm being a lot nicer to myself on what counts and what doesn't now. But cool. Yeah, maybe we should do that, or maybe I should save that for some point. I don't know when. I don't know what I'm doing. Ever, really. I haven't gone live on Twitch yet either. So that didn't help. Okay, I'm live on Twitch now. Hi Twitch. All you missed was a terrible failed collab, so this is fine. Let's focus on what was going on with Pride and Prejudice. So, rather than adding extra things for me to do with the hang cam thing, I will do that at some point, but not today. Oh goodness, today's a goofy day. Today is a goofy day. We be goofing so much today. It's the goofiest of goober days. But that's okay, because we're gonna read some Victorian drama. Boom! Oh my god, normal size phantom teleported to a different platform. Okay. What happened? So the most recent thing that happened, because we're 84% of the way through this book, it's very hard to recap everything. So I'll just recap the most recent events. So, Elizabeth's sister ran off with Mr. Wickham to marry. However, Mr. Wickham had a lot of gambling debts, and not many people saw him favourably. But in comes Mr. Darcy. Now, Mr. Darcy did try to convince Elizabeth's sister against marrying Mr. Wickham because he's an arse. However, Elizabeth's sister is an idiot and did not listen. And then, so, in order to make sure Elizabeth's sister does at least have a good life, you know, because it's just the way to do, Darcy pays off a lot of his debts. which is very kind of him to do. And he was totally doing it because he just thinks it's his fault that Mr. Wickham doesn't have a bad enough reputation because he didn't talk to anyone about it, and that's totally his fault. And he totally wasn't doing it because he likes Elizabeth or anything, baka. And now Elizabeth's actually kind of really disappointed because she's realized that she really likes Mr. Darcy too. Problem is now she's related to the man that Darcy hates the most, and Darcy knows about it and was there at the bloody wedding. Just how will they go on? Will they be able to be together? We'll have to find out. I don't know what L is in Roman numerals, but in this chapter! Yes, because they came to see the family after they were married, makes sense. Mr. Wickham was so perfectly satisfied with his conversation that he never again dressed himself, or provoked his dear sister Elizabeth by introducing the subject of it. She was quite pleased to find that she had said enough to keep him quiet. Like other people, but not bail out their in-law for 5,000 in today's money. Yeah, it was a lot of money. The day of his and Lydia's departure soon came, and Mrs. Bennet was forced to submit to a separation which, as her husband by no means entered into her scheme of their going to Newcastle, was likely to continue for at least a 12-month. L is 50? Oh, okay, so this is chapter 50. No wonder we've taken so long. This is the 11th stream of this book. This is the longest book we've read on the channel. Frankenstein was not this long. Too much sass to be contained in this book. Oh my dear Lydia, she cried. When shall we meet again? Oh Lord, I don't know. Not these 2 or 3 years, perhaps. Write to me often, my dear. Oh yeah, because then they're going up to the north. They're going to Newcastle, which is like miles off from where they are. As often as I can, but you know, married women never have much time for writing. My sisters may write to me. They have nothing else to do. I'm married and they're not. Ho 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 ho. Oh ho 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 ho. That, like, the whole, why does my Ojo-san laugh suddenly start turning into Goofy at some point? I really dislike this. I keep trying to go the ho 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 ho, and then at some point it just starts sounding like Goofy, and I really dislike this. Frankenstein probably would have been this long if Victor had given the creature a bride. Then they could have had a whole tsundere romance of their own. They could have, that's true. Goofy is the greatest Ojo-san. The American Super Bowl has kind of taught me the bigger Roman numerals, but also they didn't do L for number 50. They just wrote the number because they are cowards. They are cowards. They at any time to educate the masses, they should be taking them. It's very important. Mr. Wickham's adieus were much more affectionate than his wife. He smiled and looked handsome and said many pretty things. He is as fine a fellow, said Mr. Bennet as soon as they were out of the house, as ever I saw. He simpers and smirks and makes love to us all. I am prodigiously proud of him. I defy Sir William Lucas himself to produce a more valuable son-in-law. The loss of her daughter made Mrs. Bennet very dull for several days, and I often think that she It's gonna take me a minute. It's gonna take my tongue a minute to warm up, I think. I often think, said she, that there is nothing so bad as parting with one's friends. One seems so forlorn without them. This is the consequence, you see, madam, of marrying a daughter, said Elizabeth. It must make you better satisfied that your other four are single. No such thing! Lydia does not leave me because she is married, but only because her husband's regiment happens to be so far off. If that had been nearer, she would not have gone so soon. But with spiritless condition which this event threw her into was shortly relieved, and her mind opened again to the agitation of hope by an article of news which then began to be in circulation. The housekeeper at Netherfield had received orders to prepare for the arrival of her master, who was coming down in a day or two, to shoot there for several weeks. Mrs. Bennet was quite in the fidgets. She looked at Jane, and smiled, and shook her head by turns. Ooh, Mr. Bingley is coming back! Heck yes. Sorry, I had to finish my tea. Well, well, and so Mr. Bingley is coming down, sister. For Mrs. Phillips first brought her the news. Well, so much the better. Not that I care about it, though. He is nothing to us, you know, and I am sure I never want to see him again. But however he is, very welcome to come to Netherfield if he likes it. And who knows what may happen. But as long as... But that is nothing to us, you know. Sister, we have agreed, very long ago, never to mention a word about it. So, I'm never mentioning a word, but I'm going to go on about it, and what may happen. Good lord. Is this Elizabeth talking? I'm not sure who's talking here. And so, it is quite certain he is coming. You may depend on it, replied the other, for Mrs. Nicholas was in Merton last night. I saw her passing by and went out myself on purpose to know the truth of it. And she told me that it was certainly true. He comes down on Thursday, at the latest, very likely on Wednesday. She was going to the butcher's, she told me, on purpose to order some meat on Wednesday, and she has got 3 couple of ducks, just fit to be killed. Ooh, they're gonna have fresh duck. Lovely. Miss Bennet had not been able to hear of his coming without changing colour. It was many months since she had mentioned his name to Elizabeth, but now, as soon as they were alone together, she said, I saw you look at me today, Lizzie, when my aunt told us of the present report, and I know I appeared distressed, but don't imagine it was from any silly cause. I was only confused for the moment because I felt I should be looked at. I do assure you that the news does not affect me either with pleasure or pain. I am glad of one thing, that he comes alone, because we shall see the less of him. Not that I'm afraid of myself, but I dread the other people's remarks. Elizabeth did not know what to make of it. Had she not seen him in Derbyshire, she might have supposed him capable of coming here with no other view than was acknowledged, but she still thought him partial to Jane, and she wavered as to the greater possibility of his coming with his friend's permission, or being bold enough to come without it. Yet it is hard, she sometimes thought, that this poor man cannot come to a house which he has legally hired, without raising all this speculation. I will leave him to himself. In spite of what her sister declared, and really believed to be her feelings, in the expectation of his arrival, Elizabeth could easily perceive that her spirits were affected by it. They were more disturbed, more unequal, than she had often seen them. The subject, which had been so warmly canvassed between their parents about a 12th month ago, was now brought forward again. "As soon as ever Mr. Bingley comes, my dear," said Mrs. Bennet. "You will wait on him, of course." "No, no. You forced me into visiting him last year, and promised, if I went to see him, he should marry one of my daughters. But it ended up in nothing, and I will not be sent on a fool's errand again." His wife represented to him how absurdly necessary such an attention would be from all neighbouring gentlemen on the returning to Netherfield. "'Tis an etiquette I despise. If he wants our society, let him seek it. He knows where we live. I will not spend my hours running after my neighbours every time they go away and come back again. We all know. Well, all I know is that it will be abominably rude if you do not wait on him. But, however, that shan't prevent him from asking him to that shan't prevent my asking him to dine here. I am determined that we must have Mrs. Long and the Gouldings soon. That will make 13 with ourselves, so there will be just room at the table for him." Consoled by this resolution, she was better able to bear her husband's incivility, though it was very mortifying to know that her neighbours all might all see Mr. Bingley in consequence of it before they did, as the day of his arrival drew near. "I began to be sorry that he comes at all," said Jane to her sister. "It would be nothing. I could see him with perfect indifference, but I can hardly bear to hear it thus perpetually talked of. My mother means well, but she does not know. No one can know how much I suffer from what she says. Happy I shall be when his stay at Netherfield is over. Ugh." I like the laugh as a haughty villainous slander. It's great. That's the idea. Pretty based mindset. No need to chase someone when they can do it perfectly well. Exactly! I mean, he's just mad because when Bingley was last here and he did his wife the favour of going to see him so that he had to come see them because Victorian manners. And then his little girl got her heart broken, so he doesn't want to do it again. And I don't blame him. His girl got her heart broken. Why would he do this again? "I wish I could say anything to comfort you," replied Elizabeth, "but it is wholly out of my power. You must feel it, and the unusual satisfaction of preaching patience and suffer is denied me, because you have always so much." Mr. Bingley arrived. Mrs. Bennet, through the assistance of servants, contrived to have the earliest tidings of it, that the period of anxiety and fretfulness on her side be as long as it could. She counted the days that must interfere before their invitation could be sent, hopeless of seeing him before, but on the 3rd morning after his arrival in Hertfordshire, she saw him from her dressing-room window enter the paddock and ride towards the house. Her daughters were eagerly called to partake of her joy. Jane resolutely kept her place at the table, but Elizabeth, to satisfy her mother, went to the window. She saw Mr. Darcy with him, and sat down again by her sister. Oh my, she's like, "Oh no, Mr. Darcy has arrived again, my poor heart." This poor girl, she can't take it. Now she's realised she has feelings, she's like, "Oh no. Feelings, burp, 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 burp." That tiny little clip will stay rent-free in my head. Does anyone remember the first Shrek movie when they had that little dance party at the end and the executioner singing "Feelings"? Lives rent-free, absolutely rent-free in my head. "There is a gentleman with him, Mamma," said Kitty. Who could it be? Some acquaintance or other, my dear, I suppose. I am sure I do not know. Ah! replied Kitty. Looks just like that man that used to be with him before, Mr. What's his name? That tall, proud man. Good gracious, Mr. Darcy! And so it does. You just unlocked a childhood memory. That whole bit was so good. And so it does. I vow well any friend of Mr. Bingley will always be welcome here, to be sure. But else, I must say, I hate the very sight of him. Yep, I remember that scene. It's a good memory. It's a good memory. It's the first time I heard some of those songs, to be honest, when I was younger. Jane looked to Elizabeth with surprise and concern. She knew but little of their meetings in Derbyshire, and therefore felt the awkwardness which must attend her sister in seeing him almost for the first time after receiving his explanatory letter. Both sisters were uncomfortable enough. Each felt for the other, and, of course, for themselves. And their mother talked on her dislike of Mr. Darcy, and her resolution to be civil to him only as Mr. Bingley's friend. Oh, if only you knew, mother! If only you knew! You are worst mother on the planet. Worst mother on the planet. To Jane, he could only be a man whose proposal she had refused, and whose merit she had undervalued. But to her own more extensive information, he was the person to whom the whole family were indebted for the first of benefits, and whom she regarded herself with interest, if not quite so tender, at least as reasonable, as just, as what Jane felt for Bingley. Her astonishment at his coming to Netherfield, to Longbourn, and voluntarily seeking her again was almost equal to what she had known on first witnessing his altered behaviour in Derbyshire. Oh my, he's coming to see her. The colour which had driven from her face returned for half a minute with an additional glow, and a smile of delight added lustre to her eyes, as she thought for that space of time that his affection and wishes must still be unshaken. But she would not be secure. Let me first see how he behaves, said she. It will be early enough for his expectations. She sat down intently at work, striving to be composed, without daring to lift up her eyes, till anxious curiosity carried them to the face of her sister, as the servant was approaching the door. Jane looked a little paler than usual, but more sedate than Elizabeth had expected. On the gentleman's appearing, her colour increased, yet received them with tolerable eyes and a propriety of behaviour equally free of any symptom of resentment or any unnecessary complaints. Elizabeth said as little as either as civility would allow, and sat down again to her work, with an eagerness which did not often command. She had ventured only one glance at Darcy. He looked serious as usual, and she thought more as he had been used to look in Hertfordshire than she had seen him at Pemberley. But perhaps he could not in her mother's presence. Oh, hello, Perry! I'm okay. We attempted to have a collab today and it didn't work out, so I'm a little bit sad, I'm not gonna lie, but it's okay. We have Prides and Prejudice. Only a glance, I know. She stole a glance at him. He could not, in her mother's presence, be what he was before her uncle and aunt. It was painful, but not an improbable conjecture. Bingley she had likewise seen for an instant, and in that short period saw him looking both pleased and embarrassed. He was received by Mrs. Bennet with a degree of civility which made her two daughters ashamed, especially when contrasted with the cold and ceremonious politeness of her curtsy and address with his friend. Good lord, she's the final boss, really, trying to get past bloody mother. Elizabeth particularly, who knew that her mother owed to the latter the prevention of her favourite daughter from the irredeemable infamy, was hurt and distressed to a most painful degree by a distinction so ill applied. Darcy, after inquiring of her how Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner did, a question which she could not answer without confusion, said scarcely anything. He was not seated by her, perhaps that was the reason of his silence, but it had not been so in Derbyshire. There he had talked to her friends, when he could not to herself. But now several minutes elapsed without bringing the sound of his voice, and when occasionally, unable to resist the impulse of curiosity, she raised her eyes to his face, she often found him looking at Jane, as at herself, and frequently on no object but the ground. More thoughtfulness and less anxiety to please than when they last met were plainly expressed. She was disappointed and angry with herself for being so. I could expect it to be otherwise, said she, yet why did he come? She was in no humour for conversation with anyone but himself, and to him she had hardly the courage to speak. She inquired after his sister, but could do no more. It is a long time since Mr. Bingley. It is a long time, Mr. Bingley, since he went away, said Mrs. Bennet. He readily agreed to it. I began to be afraid you would never come back again. People did say you meant to quit the place entirely at Michelam's, but however I hoped it is not true. A great many changes have happened in the neighbourhood since you went away. Miss Lucas is married and settled, and one of my own daughters. I suppose you have heard of it. Indeed, you must have seen in the papers. It was in the Times and the Courier, I know, though it was not put in as it ought to be. It only said, lately George Wickham Esquire to Miss Lydia Bennet, without there being a single syllable said of her father, or the place where she lived, or anything. It was my brother Gardiner's drawing up, too, and I wonder how he came to make such an awkward business of it. Did you see? Yeah, she doesn't know. She doesn't know. Oh. Mr. Bingley replied that he did, and made his congratulations. Elizabeth dared not lift up her eyes. How Mr. Darcy looked, therefore, she could not tell. It was a delightful thing, to be sure, but to have a daughter well married, continued as her mother. It is a delightful thing, to be sure, to have a daughter well married, continued her mother, but at the same time, Mr. Bingley, it is very hard not to have her taken away from me. They are gone down to Newcastle, a place quite northwards, it seems, and there they are to stay. I do not know how long. His regiment is there, for I suppose you have heard of his leaving the shire, and of his being gone to the regulars. Thank heaven. He has some friends, though, perhaps not many as he deserves. Elizabeth, who knew this to be level Mr. Darcy, was in such misery of shame that she could hardly keep her seat. It drew from her, however, the exertion of speaking, which nothing else had so effectually done before, and she asked Bingley whether he meant to stay meant to make any stay in the country at present. A few weeks, he believed. When you have killed all your own birds, Mr. Bingley, said her mother, I beg you will come here and shoot as many as you please on Mr. Bennet's manor. I am sure he will be vastly happy to oblige you, and will save you all the best of the conveys for you. Jesus. Yes, yes, I do like you being around. Please come murder all the birds on the estate for us. Like ya. Elizabeth's misery increased at such an unnecessary, such officious attention. Were the same fair prospect to arise at present, and had flattered them a year ago, everything, she was persuaded, she would be hastened to the same vexatious conclusions. At that instant, she felt that years of happiness could not make Jane or herself amends for moments of such painful confusion. Basically, we're incredibly embarrassed because Mum's fucking embarrassing right now. She's the worst. Oh yes, marry my daughter, please, marry my daughter, please, marry my daughter, please, marry my daughter, please. Would you be so kind as to marry my daughter, please? The worst. The first wish of my heart, she said to herself, is never more to be in company with either of them. Their society can afford no pleasure that will atone for such wretchedness as this. Let me never see either one of the other again. Yet the misery, for which years of happiness were to offer no compensation, received soon afterwards material relief from observing how much beauty of her sister rekindled the admiration of her former lover. When first he came in, he had spoken to her but little, but every 5 minutes seemed to be giving her more of his attention. He found her as handsome as she had been last year, as good-natured, and as unaffected, though not quite so chatty. Jane was anxious that no difference should be perceived in her at all, and was really persuaded that she talked as much as ever, but her mind was so busily engaged that she did not always know when she was silent. When the gentleman rose to go away, Mrs. Bennet was mindful of her intended civility, and they were invited to and engaged to dine at Longbourn in a few days' time. It feels so heavy-handed in getting Mr. Bingley to stay. I am getting second-hand embarrassment for everyone's behaviour. Yes, it's awful. Absolutely awful. You are quite a visit in my debt, Mr. Bingley. Jesus. You owe me a visit, man, she says. For when you went to town last year, you promised to take a family dinner with us as soon as you returned. I have not forgotten, you see, and I assure you I was very much disappointed that you did not come back and keep your engagement. Mr. Bingley looked a little silly at his reflection, and said something of his concern at having been prevented by business. They went away. Mrs. Bennet had been strongly inclined to ask them to stay and dine there that day, but though she always kept a very good table, she did not think anything less than 2 courses would be good enough for a man on whom she had such anxious designs, or satisfy the appetite and pride of one who had 10,000 a year. Oh, lordy, this woman. As soon as they were gone, Elizabeth walked out to discover her spirits, or, in other words, to dwell without interruption on those subjects which must Devon more. Mr. Darcy's behaviour astonished and vexed her. Why, if he came only to be silent, grave, and indifferent, said she, did he come at all? She could settle it in no way that gave her pleasure. She could still be amiable, still pleasing, to my uncle and aunt when he was in town, why not me? If he fears, why come hither? If he has no longer cares for me, then why silent? Teasing man. I will think no more about him. That's fair, sweetie. You don't need to. He's just being a dumb. He didn't know how to... I just think he didn't know how to handle the situation. Also, her mother puts him off. And I don't fucking blame him. Her resolution was for a short time involuntary, kept by her approach of her sister, who joined her with a cheerful look, which showed her better satisfaction with their visitors than Elizabeth. Oh, Bingley, you must join us, and Bridie, in a strolling across the land between. Stormvale Castle has the best dinner menu, I must say. Afterwards, we can get the most scrumptious dessert in Minecraft. That would be lovely. I would love to do this. This sounds great. I want this to be real. With a cheerful look, which showed her better satisfaction with their visitors than Elizabeth. Now, said she, that this first meeting is over, I shall feel perfectly easy. I know my own strength. I shall never be embarrassed again by his coming. And I am glad he dines here on Tuesday. It will then be publicly seen that on both sides we meet as common and indifferent acquaintance. Common and Sweetie. Sweetie girl, can you accept that you like him? Sorry, I may be fiddling with a crochet project. I need some scissors right now. My dear Lizzie, you cannot think me so weak as to be in danger right now. Oh yes, very indifferent indeed, said Elizabeth laughably. Oh, Jane, take care. Yes, very indifferent. Oh, Jane. Oh, sweetie. You could not think me so weak as to be in danger right now. I think you are in very great danger of making him as much in love with you as ever. They did not see the gentleman again until Tuesday, and Mrs. Bennet, in the meanwhile, was giving way to all the happy schemes which the good humour and common politeness of Bingley in half an hour's visit had revived. He was literally only there for half an hour, and she's like, oh, the marriage! The marriage! Ugh. On Tuesday, there was a large party assembled at Longbourn, and the two who were most anxiously expected, to the credit of their punctuality as sportsmen, were in very good time. When they repaired to the dining room, Elizabeth eagerly watched to see whether Bingley would take the place which, in all their former parties, had belonged to him by her sister. Her prudent mother, occupied by the same ideas, forbore to invite him to sit by herself. On entering the room, he seemed to hesitate, but Jane happened to look around, and happened to smile. It was decided. He placed herself by her. Ah. She was like, yes, this one is mine. Cute. Elizabeth, with a triumphant sensation, looked towards his friend. He bore it with noble indifference, and she would have imagined that Bingley had received his sanctions to be happy, had she not seen his eyes likewise turned towards Mr. Darcy, with an expression of a half-laughing alarm. His behaviour to her sister was such during dinner-time, and showed an admiration of her which, though more guarded than formerly, persuaded Elizabeth that, if left wholly to himself, Jane's happiness and his own would be speedily secured. Though she dared not depend upon the consequence, yet received pleasure from observing his behaviour. It gave her all the animation that her spirits could boast, for she was in no cheerful humour. Mr. Darcy was almost as far from her as the table could divide them. Aww. So happy for her sister, but her husband was miles away. He was on the other side of her mother. Oh God, and they put him next to her mother. She knew how little such a situation would give pleasure to either, or make either appear to advantage. She was not near enough to hear any of the discourse, but she could see how seldom they spoke to each other, and how formal and cold was their manner whenever they did. Can't believe she got blocked, but I know! If her mother just knew how much Darcy loved her, then she would be like, oh, you like my daughter? You'll marry my daughter? Fine, I love you. Even if she hates a guy, she'll be like, oh, you're gonna marry my daughter? Fine. You're a horrible psychopath, but you want to marry my daughter? Fine. This woman is the worst. The literal worst. Her mother's ungracious smile made the sense of what they had owed him more painful to Elizabeth's mind, and she would at times have given anything to be privileged to tell him that his kindness was neither unknown nor unfelt by the whole family. She was in hopes that the evening would afford some opportunity of bringing them together, that the whole of the visit would not pass away without enabling them to enter into some more conversation than the more ceremonious saluted. The most ceremonious salutations attended his entrance. Anxious and uneasy, the period which passed was the drawing-room before the gentleman came, was wearisome and dull to the degree that almost made her uncivil. She looked forward to their entrance as the point on which all her chance of pleasure for the evening must depend. Hello, Aidan, welcome! You're literally Jack the Ripper. But you want to marry my daughter? No problem here! Yep, that's Mrs. Bingley. If he does not come to me, then, said she, I shall give him up forever. The gentleman came, and she thought that he looked as if he would have answered her hopes, but alas, the ladies had crowded round the table, where Miss Bennet was making tea, and Elizabeth pouring out the coffee in so close a confederacy that there was not a single vacancy near her which would admit of a chair, and on the gentleman's approaching, one of the girls moved closer to her than ever, and she said in a whisper, "The men shan't come and part us. I am determined we want none of them, do we?" Bro, she 100% wants one of them. Her daughters will have better chance of getting married if she did nothing but stepped back, but also, who would want to admit that to themselves? Very true. The books be booking. We're getting there. It's mostly comics at this point, but you know. Anything counts as a book as long as it's written with love. Darcy had walked away to another part of the room. She followed him with her eyes, envied anyone to whom he spoke, and scarcely patience enough to help anybody to coffee, and then was enraged against herself for being so silly. A man who has once been refused, how could I ever be foolish enough to expect a renewal of his love? Is there one among the sex who would not protest against such a weakness as a second proposal to the same woman? There is no indignity so abhorrent to their feelings. She was a little relieved, however, by his bringing back his coffee cup himself, and she seized the opportunity of saying, "Is your sister at Pemberley still?" "Yes, she will remain there till Christmas." "And quite alone? Have all her friends left her?" "Miss Annesley is with her. The others have been gone on to Scarsborough these 3 weeks." Anything counts as a book as long as it features words arranged in sentences. Technically, yes. She could not think of nothing more to say, but if he wishes to converse with her, he might have better success. He stood by her, however, for some minutes in silence, and, at least on the young lady's whispering to Elizabeth again, he walked away. When the tea things were removed and the card tables were placed, the ladies all rose, and Elizabeth was then hoping to be joined by him, when all her views were overthrown, by seeing him fall a victim to her mother's rapidicity for whilst players, and in a few moments after seated with the rest of the party, she now lost every expectation of pleasure. They were confined for the evening at different tables, and she had nothing to hope, but that his eyes were so often turned towards her side of the room as to make him play as unsuccessful as herself. Oh, she's been trying to get his attention the whole time. Maybe you should books in chronological order, starting from book 1, and we should brush up on our Sumerian cuneiform. Oh, good lord, that would be awful. We would learn every language in the world, though. That would be great. But that's cool. Glad you're watching on a big screen. Mrs. Bennet had designed to keep the two Netherfield gentlemen to supper, but their carriage was, unluckily, ordered before any of the others, and she had no opportunity of detaining them. "Well, girls," said she, as soon as they were left themselves, "what say you to the day? I think everything passed off uncommonly well. I assure you the dinner was as well dressed as any I saw. The venison was roasted to a turn, and everybody said they never saw so fat a haunch. The soup was 50 times better than what we had at the Lucases last week, and even Mr. Darcy acknowledged that the partridges were remarkably well done, and I suppose he has 2 or 3 French cooks at least. And my dear Jane, I never saw you look in greater beauty. Mrs. Long said so too, for I asked her whether you did or not." Jesus Christ. Mrs. Bennet! Why? She's the worst. "And what do you think?" she said. "Besides, Mrs. Bennet, we shall have her at Netherfield at last." She did, indeed. "I do think Mrs. Long is a good creature as ever lived, and her nieces are very pretty, behaved girls, and not at all handsome. I like them prestigious." Bridie the movie definitely won't be a thing for a while. So she's basically, "Oh my, I like Mrs. Long because all her nieces aren't that pretty compared to my daughters." Jesus Christ, woman. Mrs. Bennet, in short, was in very great spirits. She had been enough of Bingley's behaviour to Jane to be convinced that she would get him at last, and her expectations of advantage to her family when in a happy humour was so far beyond reason that she was quite disappointed at not seeing him there again the next day to make his proposal. This woman! Mrs. Bennet's being such a Mrs. Bennet. Oh god, she's the worst. Literally the worst person. Where's Lucas? I have no idea. He was in the chat. I think he said he was lurking today. Oh. What do you mean he's not proposing to my daughter after 2 conversations with her in a year? Of course. Thank you for the follow, Ronach. Thank ya. Appreciate it. Yay. "It has been a very agreeable day, and Miss Bennet to Elizabeth," said Miss Bennet to Elizabeth. "The party seems so well selected, so suitable one with the other. I hope we may often meet again." Elizabeth smiled. Lizzie, you must not do so. You must not suspect me. It mortifies me, I assure you, that I have now learnt to enjoy his conversation as an agreeable and sensible young man without having to wish beyond it. I am perfectly satisfied, from what his manners now are, that he never had any design of engaging my affection. It is only that he is blessed with greater sweetness of address, and a strong desire of generally pleasing than any other man. Bless Jane's little heart. She's so afraid of getting her heart broken again that she's like, no, he won't propose to me. He won't. I got my hopes up last time. I'm not doing it again. Bless her. Mr. Bingley wakes up in the middle of the night and Mrs. Bennet is whispering in his ear to marry her daughters to make sure the idea stays in his mind. She totally would. If she knew, if she thought that would work, she would do it because she's a crazy lady like that. You are very cruel, said her sister. You will not let me smile and are provoking me to it at every moment. How hard is it, in some cases, to be believed, and how impossible in others. But why should you wish to persuade me that I feel more than I acknowledge? That is a question that I hardly know how to answer. We all love to instruct, though we can teach only what is worth knowing. Forgive me, and if you persist in indifference, do not make me your confidant. If you're going to keep being in denial, don't talk to me about it if you don't want me to smile about it. That, or pay a massive hot air balloon to fly over with the words, "Marry my daughter," plastered on it while pretending not to notice. Oh, that's so strange, don't you think? That happens to a hot air balloon saying to marry Jane. How strange, Mr. Bingley, how strange. Look at her, look at this woman. Lizzie, my dear, I want to speak with you. A few days after this visit, Mr. Bingley called again and alone. His friend had left him that morning for London, but was to return home in 10 days' time. He sat with them above an hour, and was in remarkably good spirits. Mrs. Bennet invited him to dine with them, but, with many expressions of concern, he confessed himself engaged elsewhere. "Next time you call," said she, "I hope we shall be more lucky." He should not be particularly happy any time, etc., etc., and if she would give him leave, would take an early opportunity of waiting on them. "Can you come tomorrow?" Yes. He had no engagement at all for tomorrow, and her invitation was accepted with alacrity. He came, and in such good time that the ladies were none of them dressed. In ran Mrs. Bennet to her daughter's room, in her dressing gown, with her hair half finished, crying out, "My dear Jane, make haste and hurry down! He is come! Mr. Bingley is come! He is indeed! Make haste, make haste! Here, Sarah, come to Miss Bennet this moment and help her on her gown. Help her on with her gown. Never mind Miss Lizzie's hair." She gives some music sheet there. If you make a band play backwards, it means you want to marry my daughter. Had to look up whether there was a record player available then. They don't seem to have one, or at least like maybe the rich people had them at that point. But she did. They do have pianos, that's for sure. "We will be done as soon as we can," said Jane, "but I dare say Kitty is forwarder than either of us, for she went upstairs half an hour ago." "Oh, hang Kitty! What has she to do with it? Come, be quick, be quick! Where is your sash, my dear?" But when her mother was gone, Jane would not be prevailed on to go down without one of her sisters. The same anxiety to get them by themselves was visible again in the evening, After tea, Mr. Bennet retired to the library, as was his custom, and Mary went upstairs to her instrument, 2 obstacles of 5 being thus removed. Mrs. Bennet sat winking at Elizabeth and Catherine for a considerable time. Leave them! Leave them! I want them to get married! Elizabeth would not observe her, and when at last Kitty did, she very innocently said, "What is the matter, Mamma? What do you keep winking at me for? What am I to do?" Oh, bless her. "Nothing, child. I did not wink at you." She then sat still 5 minutes longer, unable to waste such a precious occasion. She suddenly got up, saying to Kitty, "Come here, my love, I want to speak to you," took her out of the room. Jane instantly gave a look at Elizabeth which spoke her distress, such premeditation, and her entreaty that she would not give into it. In a few minutes, Mrs. Bennet half opened the door, and called out, "Lizzie, my dear, I want to speak with you." Elizabeth was forced to go. Oh, bless. "We may as well leave them by themselves, you know," said her mother as soon as she was in the hall. "Kitty and I are going upstairs, in my dressing room." Elizabeth made no attempt to reason with her mother, but remained quietly in the hall till she and Kitty were out of sight, and returned to the drawing room. I think the technology existed, but it was still very experimental, most likely. I love how this book has a lot of advancements into context, especially when trying to make a themed joke. Elizabeth made no attempt to reason with her. Yes. Mrs. Bennet's schemes for this day were ineffectual. Bingley was everything that was charming, except the professed lover of her daughter. His ease and cheerfulness rendered him most agreeable addition to their evening party, and he bore with ill-judged officiousness of the mother, and heard all her silly remarks with a forbearance and command of countenance particularly grateful to the daughter. He scarcely needed an invitation to stay supper, and before he went away an engagement was formed, chiefly through his own and Mrs. Bennet's means, for his coming next morning to shoot with her husband. I got excited when they said engagement. I thought Mrs. Bennet had actually done it. After this day, Jane said no more of her indifference. Not a word passed between the sisters concerning Bingley, but Elizabeth went to bed in the happy belief that all must speedily be concluded, unless Mr. Darcy returned within the stated time. Seriously, however, she felt tolerably persuaded that all this must have taken place with that gentleman's concurrence. Bingley was punctual to his appointment, and he and Mr. Bennet spent the long morning together, as had been agreed on. The latter was much more agreeable than his companion expected. There was nothing of presumption or folly in Bingley that could provoke his ridicule or disgust him into silence, and he was more communicative and less eccentric than the other had ever seen him. Bingley, of course, returned with him to dinner, and in the evening Mrs. Bennet's invention was again at work to get everybody away from him and her daughter Elizabeth. Elizabeth, who had a letter to write, went into the breakfast room for that purpose soon after tea, for as the others were all going to sit down to cards, she could not be wanted to counteract her mother's schemes. But on her returning to the drawing room, when her letter was finished, she saw, to her infinite surprise, there was no reason to fear that her mother had been too ingenious for her. On opening the door, she perceived her sister and Bingley standing together over the hearth, as if engaged in earnest conversation, and had this led to no suspicion, the faces of both, as they hastily turned around and moved away from each other, would have told it all. Their situation was awkward enough, but hers, she thought, was still worse. Not a syllable was uttered by either, and Elizabeth was on the point of going away again, when Bingley, who was well as the other hand sat down, suddenly arose and whispered a few words to her sister, and ran out of the room. Jane could have no reserves from Elizabeth, where confidence would give pleasure, and instantly embracing her, acknowledged with the liveliest emotion that she was the happiest creature in the world. "'Tis too much," she added, "by far too much. I do not deserve it. Oh, why is everybody not as happy?" Oh, what a sweetie. She gets nice things, and her first thought is, why is everyone not as happy as me? Ugh. Elizabeth's congratulations were given with a sincerity, a warmth, a delight which words could but poorly express. Every sentence. "Oh, hello, Teller! You stopped your streaming, but decided to raid me. Thank you." Elizabeth's congratulations were given with a sincerity, a warmth, a delight, which words could not poorly express. Every sentence of kindness was a fresh source of happiness to Jane, but she would not allow herself to stay with her sister, or say half that remained to be said for the present. I must go instantly to my mother," she cried. "I would not on any account trifle with her affection's solicitude, or allow her to hear it from anyone but myself. He is gone to my father already. Oh, Lizzie, to know that I have to relate will give such pleasure to all my dear family. How shall I bear so much happiness?" Usually do a shorter stream on Sundays. Fair dues. She hastened away to her mother, who had purposely broken up the card party and was sitting upstairs with Kitty. Elizabeth, who was left by herself, now smiled at the rapid and ease with which an affair was finally settled, that had given them so many previous months of suspense and vexation. "And this," said she, "is the end of all his friends' anxious circumspection, of all his sister's falsehoods and contrivances, the happiest, wisest, and most reasonable end." In a few minutes she was joined by Bingley, whose conference with her father had been short and to the purpose. "Where is your sister?" said he hastily, as he opened the door. "With my mother upstairs. She will be down in a moment, I dare say." He then shut the door, and, coming up to her, claimed the good wishes and affections of a sister. Elizabeth honestly and heartily experienced her delight in the prospect of their relationship. They shook hands with great cordiality, and then, till her sister came down, she had to listen to all he had to say of his own happiness and of Jane's perfections. And in spite of his being a lover, Elizabeth really believed all his expectations of fealty to be rationally founded, because they had for basis the excellent understanding and super-excellent disposition of Jane, and a general similarity of feeling and taste between her and himself. It was an evening of no common delight to them all. The satisfaction of Miss Bennet's mind gave such a glow of sweet animation to her face as made her look handsomer than ever. Kitty simpered and smiled and hoped her turn was coming soon. Mrs. Bennet could not give her consent or speak her approbation in terms warm enough to satisfy her feelings, though she talked to Bingley of nothing else. For half an hour, when Mr. Bennet joined them at supper, his voice and manner plainly showed how really happy he was. Not a word, however, passed his lips in allusion to it, till their visitor took his leave for the night. But as soon as he was gone, he turned to his daughter and said, "Jane, I congratulate you. You will be a very happy woman." Jane went to him instantly, kissed him, and thanked him for his goodness. "Welcome back, Boris." "You are a good girl," he replied, "and I have great pleasure in thinking that you will be happily settled. I have not a doubt of your doing very well together. Your tempers are by no means unlike. You are each of you so complying that nothing will ever be resolved on. So easy that every servant will cheat you, and so generous that you will always exceed your income. I hope not so. Imprudence or thoughtlessness in money matters would be unpardonable in me. Exceed their income, my dear Mr. Bennet, cried his wife. What are you talking of? Why, he has 4,000-5,000 a year. Very likely more. Then addressing her daughter, oh, my dear Jane, I am so happy. I am sure I shan't get a wink of sleep all night. I knew how it would be. I always said it must be so at last. I was sure you could not be so beautiful for nothing. I remember as soon as I ever saw him, when he first came to Hertfordshire last year, I thought how likely it was that you should come together. Oh, he is the handsomest young man that ever was seen. Wickham, Lydia were all forgotten. Jane was beyond competition, her favourite child. At that moment she cared for no other. Her younger sisters soon began to make interest with her for objects of happiness, which she might in the future be able to dispense. Mary petitioned for the use of the library at Netherfield, and Kitty begged very hard for a few balls there every winter. Bingley, from this time, was, of course, a daily visitor at Longbourn, coming frequently before breakfast and always remaining till after supper, unless when some barbarous neighbour, who could not be enough detested, had given him an invitation to dinner, which he thought himself obliged to accept. Elizabeth had now but little time for conversation with her sister. For a while he was present. Jane had no attention to bestow on anyone else, but she found herself considerably useful to both of them, in those hours of separation that must sometimes occur. In the absence of Jane, he always attached himself to Elizabeth for the pleasure of talking of her, and when Bingley was gone, Jane constantly sought the same means of relief. Third wheel, Elizabeth! He has made me so happy, said she, one evening, by telling me that he was totally ignorant of my being in town last spring. I had not believed it possible. I suspected as much, replied Elizabeth, but how did he account for it? It must have been his sister's doing. They were certainly no friends of his acquaintance with me, which I cannot wonder at, since he might have chosen so much more advantageous in many respects. But when they see, I shall trust they will, that their brother is happy with me, they will learn to be contented, and we shall be on good terms again, though we can never be that we once were to each other. That is the most unforgiving speech, said Elizabeth, that I ever heard from you. Good girl! It would vex me indeed to see you again the dupe of Miss Bingley's pretended regard. Would you believe it, Lizzie, that when he went to town last November, he really loved me, and nothing but the persuasion of my being indifferent would have prevented him from coming to town again? He made a little mistake, to be sure, but it is to the credit of his modesty. This naturally introduced a panegyric from Jane on his diffidence, and the little value he put on his own good qualities. Elizabeth was pleased to find that he had not betrayed the indifference of his friends, for though Jane had the most generous and forgiving heart in the world, she knew it was a circumstance which must prejudice her against him. I am certainly the most favourite creature that ever existed. Oh goodness, the third wheel situation reminds me of one of the first dates I had with my fiancé, where a friend was invited, only myself and the friend didn't know the other was invited. Oh no, that's awkward. I am certainly the most fortunate creature that ever lived, that ever existed, cried Jane. Oh, Lizzie, why am I thus singled from my family and blessed above all of them? If I could but see you as happy, if there was but such another man for you. Oh, I mean, there is a man for this one. If you were to give me 40 such men, I never could be as happy as you. Till I have your disposition, your goodness, I never can have your happiness. No, no. Let me shift for myself, and perhaps, if I have very good luck, I may meet with another Mr. Collins in time. Oh, God. Elizabeth, don't sell yourself short. Girl, get that bar higher up, because Mr. Collins is not a very good bar. The situation of affairs in the Longbourn family could not be long secret. Mrs. Bennet was privileged to whisper it to Mrs. Phillips, and she ventured, without any permission, to do the same by all her neighbours in Merton. The Bennets were speedily pronounced to be the luckiest family in the world, though only a few weeks before, when Lydia had first run away, they had been generally proved to be marked out for misfortune. Look at me, I've never been a third wheel because I have no friends that never leave the house. I suppose that is a small silver lining to that situation. Moving on. If L is 50, that means we're on chapter 56? That's bonkers. One morning, about a week after Bingley's engagement with Jane had been formed, as he and the females of the family were sitting together in the dining room, their attention was suddenly drawn to the window by the sound of a carriage. They had perceived a chassis and 4 driving up the lawn. It was too early in the morning for visitors, and besides, the equipage did not answer for any of their neighbours. The horses were post, and neither the carriage nor the livery of the servant who preceded it were familiar to them. As it was certain, however, that somebody was coming, Bingley instantly prevailed on Miss Bennet to avoid the confinement of such intrusion, and walk away with him to the shrubbery. 89. So we've maybe done at least like 6% of the book today. Still not too much. They both set off, and the conjectures of the remaining 3 continued with little satisfaction, till the doorway was thrown open, and their visitor entered. It was Lady Catherine de Bourgh. What business does she have here? To come herself? They were, of course, all intending to be surprised, but their astonishment was beyond their expectation. And on the part of Miss Bennet and Kitty, though she was perfectly unknown to them, even inferior to what Elizabeth felt. She entered the room with an air more than usually ungracious, made no reply to Elizabeth's salutations, than a slight inclination of the head, and sat down without saying a word. Elizabeth had mentioned her name to her mother on her ladyship's entrance, though no request of introduction had been made. Mrs. Bennet, all amazed, though flattered by having a guest of such high importance, received her with utmost politeness. After sitting for a moment in silence, she said, very stiffly to Elizabeth, "I hope you are well, Miss Bennet. That lady, I suppose, is your mother." Elizabeth replied very concisely that she was. "And that, I suppose, is one of your sisters." Yes, ma'am," said Mrs. Bennet, delighted to speak to Lady Catherine. "She is my youngest girl, but one. My youngest of all is lately married, and my eldest is somewhere about the grounds walking with a young man who I believe will soon be part of the family." "You have a very small park here," returned Lady Catherine after a short silence. "It is nothing in comparison to Rostings, my lady, I dare say, but I assure you it is much larger than Sir William Lucas's." "This must be most inconvenient," this must be a most inconvenient sitting room. For the evening in summer, the windows are full west. Mrs. Bennet assured her that they never sat there after dinner, and then added, "May I take the liberty of asking your ladyship whether you left Mr. and Mrs. Collins as well?" "Yes, very well. I saw them last night before last." Elizabeth now expected that she would produce a letter for her from Charlotte, as it seemed the only probable motive for her calling, but no letter appeared, and she was completely puzzled. Mrs. Bennet, with great civility, begged her ladyship to take some refreshment, but Lady Catherine very resolutely and not very politely declined eating anything, and then rising up, said to Elizabeth, "Miss Bennet, there seemed to be a prettyish kind of wildness on one side of your lawn. I should be glad to take a turn in it, if you will favour me with your company." "Go, my dear," cried her mother, "and show her ladyship about the different walks. I think she will be pleased with the hermitage." Elizabeth obeyed, and running into her own for her parasol, attended her noble guest downstairs. As they passed through the hall, Lady Catherine opened the doors into the dining parlour and drawing room, and pronounced them, after a short survey, to be decent-looking rooms, and walked on. Her carriage remained at the door, and Elizabeth saw that her waiting woman was in it. They proceeded in silence along the gravel walk that led to the copse. Elizabeth was determined to make no effort for conversation with a woman who was now more than usually insolent and disagreeable. I think she's found out that Darcy likes her, so she's like, "I must look and check she is worthy." "How could I ever think of her like her nephew?" said she as she looked in her face. As soon as they entered the copse, Lady Catherine began in the following manner. "You can be at no loss, Miss Bennet, to understand the reason of my journey hither. Your own heart, your own consciousness must tell you why I am come." Elizabeth looked with unaffectionate astonishment. "Indeed, you are mistaken, madame. I have not been able to account for the honour of seeing you here." "Miss Bennet," replied her ladyship in an angry tone, "you ought to know that I am not to be trifled with. But however insincere you may choose to be, you shall not find me so. My character has ever been celebrated for its sincerity and frankness, and in a cause of such import as this, I shall certainly not depart from it. A report of a most alarming nature reached me 2 days ago. I was told that not only your sister was on point of being most advantageously married, but that Miss Elizabeth Bennet would, in all likelihood, be soon afterwards united with my nephew, my own nephew, Mr. Darcy. Though I know it must be a scandalous falsehood, though I would not injure him so much as to suppose the truth of its possible, I instantly resolved on setting off for this place, that I might make my sentiments known to you." Yeah, she doesn't approve. Of course she doesn't approve. "Is she worthy to wield me on your..." No, wait, wrong universe. "Is she worthy to marry Mr. Darcy?" "If you believed it impossible, then it must be true," said Elizabeth, colouring with astonishment and disdain. I wonder you took the trouble of coming so far. What could your ladyship propose by it?" "At once you insist having such a report universally contradicted." "Your coming to Longbourn to see me and my family," said Elizabeth coolly, "will be rather a confirmation of it, if indeed such a report is in existence." "If? Do you pretend to be ignorant of it? Has it not been industriously calculated by yourselves? Do you not know that such a report is spread abroad? I never heard that it was. And can you likewise declare that there is no foundation for it? I do not pretend to propose equal frankness with your ladyship. You may ask questions which I shall not choose to answer. This is not to be borne, Miss Bennet. I insist on being satisfied. Has my nephew made you an offer of marriage? Technically, yes, but she said no. Your ladyship has declared it to be impossible. It ought to be so. It must be so. While he retains the use of reason, but your arts and allurements may, in a moment of infatuation, have made him forget what he owes to himself and to all his family. You may have drawn him in. If I have, I shall be the last person to confess it. Miss Bennet, do you know who I am? I have not been accustomed to such language as this. I am almost the nearest relation he has in the world, and am entitled to know all his dearest concerns. But you are not entitled to know mine, nor will such behaviour as this ever induce me to be explicit. Let me rightly understood, this match, to which you have been presumed to aspire, can never take place. No, never. Darcy is engaged to my daughter. Now what have you to say? Only this, that if he is so, you can have no reason to suppose that he will make an offer to me. Lady Catherine hesitated a moment, and then replied, The engagement between them is of a peculiar kind. From their infancy they have been intended for each other. It was the favourite wish of his mother, as well as of hers, while their cradles were planned the union. And now, at the moment when the wishes of both sisters would be accomplished, is their marriage to be prevented by a young woman of inferior birth, of no importance in the world, and wholly unallied with the family? Do you pay no regard to the wishes of his friends, to his tacit agreement with Mr. Borough? Are you lost to every feeling of propriety and delicacy? Have you not heard me say that from his earliest hours he was destined for his cousin? Yes, and I have heard it before. But what is it? What is that to you? But what is that to me? If there is no other objection to my marrying your nephew, I shall certainly not be kept from it, by knowing that his mother and aunt wished him to marry Miss de Borough. You both did as much as you could in planning the marriage. Its completion depended on others. If Mr. Darcy is neither by honour nor inclination confined to his cousin, why is not he to make another choice? And if I am that choice, why may I not accept him? Because honour, decorum, prudence, nay, interest forbid it. Yes, Miss Bennet, interest for you. For do not expect to be noticed by his family or friends. If you wilfully act against the inclinations of all, you will be censured, slighted, and despised by everyone connected with him. Your alliance will be a disgrace. Your name will never be mentioned by any of us. These are heavy misfortunes, replied Elizabeth, but the wife of Mr. Darcy must have such extraordinary sources of happiness necessarily attached to her situation, that she could, upon the whole, have no cause to repine. Obstinate, headstrong girl, I am ashamed of you. Is this your gratitude for my attentions to you last spring? Is nothing due to me on that score? Let us sit down. You are to understand, Miss Bennet, that I came here with the determined resolution of carrying my purpose, nor will I be dissuaded from it. I have not been used to submit to any personal whims. I have not been the habit of brokering disappointment. That will make your ladyship's situation at present more pitiable, but will have no effect on me. I am not used to hearing people say no. Elizabeth. Shame. You will not be interrupted. Hear me in silence. My daughter and my nephew are formed for each other. They are destined on the maternal side from the same noble line, and on the father's from respectable, honourable, and ancient. Though untitled families, their fortune on both sides is splendid. They are destined for each other, and by the voice of every member of their respective houses. And what is it to divide them? The upstart pretensions of a young woman without family, connections, or fortune? Is this to be endured? But it must not, shall not be. If you were sensible of your own good, you would not wish to quit the sphere in which you have been brought up. In marrying your nephew, I should not consider myself quitting that sphere. He is a gentleman. I am a gentleman's daughter. So far, we are equal. True, you are a gentleman's daughter. But what was your mother? Who are your uncles and aunts? Do not imagine me ignorant of their conditions. Whatever my connections may be, said Elizabeth, if your nephew does not object to them, they can be nothing to you. Tell me, once and for all, are you engaged to him? Though Elizabeth would not, for the mere purpose of obliging Lady Catherine, have answered this question, she could not say, after a moment's deliberation, I am not. Lady Catherine seemed pleased. And will you promise me never to enter into such engagement? I will make no promise of that kind. Miss Bennet, I am shocked and astonished. I expected to find a more reasonable young woman, but do not deceive yourself into a belief that I will ever recede. I shall not go away till you have given me the assurance I require. And I certainly never shall give it. I am not to be intimidated into anything so wholly unreasonable. Your ladyship wants Mr. Darcy to marry your daughter, but would my giving you the wished-for promise make their marriage all the more probable? Supposing him to be attached to me, would my refusing to accept his hand make him wish to bestow it upon his cousin? Allow me to say, Lady Catherine, that the arguments with which you have supported this extraordinary application have been as frivolous as the application was ill-judged. You have widely mistaken my character if you think I can be worked on by such persuasions as these. How far your nephew might approve of your interference in his affairs, I cannot tell you, but you have certainly no right to concern yourself in mine. I must beg, therefore, to be importuned no further on the subject. Not so hasty, if you please. I have by no means done to all the objections I have already urged. I have still another to add. Hello, Twitch person with name I cannot say, but I welcome you anyway. Haha. I am no stranger to the particulars of your younger sister's infamous elopement. I know it all. That the young man's marrying her was a patched-up business, at the expense of your father and uncle, and is such a girl to be my nephew's sister? Is her husband, who is the son of his late father's steward, to be his brother? Heaven and earth! Of what are you thinking? Are the shades of Pemberley to be thus polluted? You can now have nothing further to say. she resentfully answered. You have insulted me in every possible method. I must beg you return to the house. And she rose as she spoke. Lady Catherine rose also, and they turned back. Her ladyship was highly incensed. You have no regard, then, for the honour and credit of my nephew, unfeeling, selfish girl. Do you not consider that connection with you must disgrace him in the eyes of everybody? Lady Catherine, I have nothing further to say to you. You know my sentiments. Are you then resolved to have him? I have said no such thing. I am only resolved to act in that manner which will, in my own opinion, constitute my happiness, without reference to you, or to any persons so wholly unconnected with me. It is well you refuse, then, to oblige me. You refuse to obey the claims of duty, honour, and gratitude. You are determined to ruin him with the opinion of all his friends, and make him contempt of the world. Neither duty, nor honour, nor gratitude, replied Elizabeth, has any possible claim on me. In the present instance, no principle of either would be violated by my marriage with Mr. Darcy, and with regard to the resentment of his family, or the indignation of the world, of the former were excited by his marrying me, it would not give me one moment's concern, and the world in general would have too much sense to join in the scorn. Mr. Burr is not ready for this level of sass. And this is your real opinion? This is your final resolve? Very well. I shall now know how to act. Do not imagine, Miss Bennet, that your ambition will ever be gratified. I came to try you. I hope to find you reasonable, but depend on it, I will carry my point. In this manner, Lady Catherine talked on until they were at the door of the carriage, when, turning hastily round, she added, I take no leave of you, Miss Bennet. I send no compliments to your mother. You deserve no such attention. I am most seriously displeased. Oh my, she's displeased. What shall we do? Elizabeth made no answer, and without attempting to persuade her ladyship to return to the house, walked quietly into it herself. She heard the carriage drive away as she proceeded upstairs. Her mother impatiently met her at the door of the dressing-room to ask why Lady Catherine would not come in again and rest herself. She did not choose it, says her daughter. She would go. She's a very fine-looking woman, and her calling here is so prestigiously civil. For she only came, I suppose, to tell us the Collinses were well. She is on her road somewhere, I dare say, so passing through Merton. Though she might as well call on you, I suppose she had nothing in particular to say to you, Lizzie. Elizabeth was forced to give a little falsehood here, for to acknowledge the substance of their conversation was impossible. The Victorian equivalent of get back, you don't know me like that. Without reference to you, or to any person that is wholly unconcerned with me. That is a line that hits so hard, and I think that's so true now. Like, especially with the internet. We probably concern ourselves, me as a VTuber, probably concern myself with what people think of me far too much. But really, without reference to you, or any person wholly unconcerned, I decided to be a potato. Elizabeth! Forever will she be literally best girl. Literary classic best girl. I decided when I finish this book, I'm gonna go track down the movies. I really want to watch the Keira Knightley movie of Pride and Prejudice after we've read it. And we are 91% of the way through, so we probably only got 1 or 2 more streams. Obviously, next week we're going to attempt to collab with Teller again, so we'll give that another go. But until then, everybody, this is unfortunately the end of the stream. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Thank you, everyone who lurked. Thank you to anyone who watches the VOD. Thank you to anyone who chatted. I really appreciate you following and interacting with my stuff and supporting me. It's great. Thank you, thank you. If you have not already, I would highly appreciate it if you If you have not already, if you're on YouTube, if you could leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. And if you are on Twitch, if you could give the channel a cheeky little follow. Blah, blah, blah. Yes. Are you saying Elizabeth should become a potato as well? She's too badass to be a potato. She'd be a more badass vegetable than a potato. I'm not sure what's a badass vegetable. I'll let you guys decide that. If you would like to support this potato in her dream of attempting to live with capitalism in a way that she enjoys in her life and not wanting to die of a job she doesn't want to do, and also help her bring you many cool bits of content, you can support her in many ways. Via membership, which you get YouTube membership, that is, where you get emotes, exclusive streams, Discord channel, and merch discounts. There is the Patreon, where you get basically all of those, but you get short stories and you get free books. There is the Kofi, where if you like my emotes, I will draw you some emotes. You can commission me to do so via my Kofi. Or you can get some small audiobook short stories if you like listening to me talk. And last but not least, there is my merch store, where you can get ebooks, first edition copies of books I've written, bookmarks, keyrings, t-shirts, notebooks, and stickers, and a pillow. Support Comrade Potato, yes. Onion, definitely, after all, the survivability of an onion is the thing. That's true. And her sass can definitely make people cry as well. So, yes, she would be an onion, because she's very cool. I will be back tomorrow. Probably recording more lines, doing some more Little Red and the Baba Yaga. I didn't get to actually finish the lines that I wanted to last week. I ended up a bit busier than I expected. So we're going to do our best to get through that next week. But until then, I had fun. I hope you had fun. This has been Brandon Westmith, live from the Forbidden Library. Goodbye.